The title of today's meeting is 80 Years After the German Catastrophe. In 1993, Hitler was announced Chancellor by Hindenburg, and this was carried out from the standpoint of the German bourgeoisie to prepare the Second World War. The years of Nazi dictatorship resulted in a catastrophe for the German working class and for Europe as a whole. The relevance of this meeting is shown by the revelations of Edward Snowden, which reveal that the ruling elites all over the world are preparing new dictatorial authoritarian measures against the working class. These preparations are being carried out behind the backs of working people. The erection of such surveillance mechanisms is the preparation on the part of the ruling class for confrontations with the working class under conditions of an unprecedented crisis of capitalism. The German state, the German BND, the German intelligence services, works closely together with the American NSA in these preparations. The latest edition of Spiegel reports as further revelations P6 operation, which according to Spiegel has set up a data bank which is erected apparently against terrorists, but as the report reveals, these terrorists included one Spiegel reporter himself. In his report, in this secret act, he was accused of carrying out investigative journalism and having visited Afghanistan. This was enough to make him a supporter of terror, or a alleged supporter of terrorism. Many people who we've spoken to in the past weeks during our election campaign are clear that the real issues in this election are being not discussed. PSG and the fourth, which is the German section of the Fourth International, which was founded 75 years ago by Trotsky, is the only party to intervene in this election and raise the vital questions. Our main speaker today is Christoph van Dwyer, who will speak about the most recent developments in light of the historical development. He's our leading candidate for the state of Berlin in the general election. Thank you, Dima. I'm not the leading candidate. The leading candidate is Ulrich Rippert. I'm on the state list, but I am a candidate for the election in Berlin. Today we want to discuss the relevance of the German catastrophe, the victory of fascism for Germany today. 80 years ago, the Nazis established their reign of terror. They smashed the workers' organizations, organized the Holocaust, and drenched Europe in blood. It's often been stated that Hitler was brought to power with the support of the majority of the population. The rise of the Nazi Party is treated as a phenomena with its roots in mass psychology to be explained by the evil depths of the human soul or the dialectic of enlightenment. In fact, Hitler was deliberately brought to power by the German bourgeoisie to break the opposition of workers and smash their organizations. Already in 1932, 1 year before the Nazi takeover, Leo Trotsky, the founder of the Fourth International, explained the relationship between capitalist crisis and the development of dictatorship. In the text he wrote, for a whole series of stages, the bourgeoisie entrenched its power under the form of parliamentary democracy, even then not peacefully and not voluntarily. But in the last instance it succeeded with the aid of combination of violent measures and concessions, privations and reforms, in subordinating within the framework of formal democracy, not only the petty bourgeoisie, but also in considerable measure also the proletariat, by means of the new petty bourgeoisie. Precisely with the war begins the distinct decline of capitalism and above all its democratic form of denomination. It is now no longer a matter of new reforms, but abolishing the old ones. I think these words still retain their relevance today. The last parliamentary government of the Weimar Republic was led by the Social Democrat Hermann Müller. It broke apart under conditions of growing social polarization and the burden involved in building up the German war machine. The economic crisis led to a growth of unemployment from 2 to 3 million in just 1 year, 1928-29. Against this background, and given the organized working class, further cuts in social spending could not be implemented with parliamentary methods. The presidential cabinet of Heinrich Brüning ruled with emergency decrees and sidelined the German parliament completely. It imposed massive wage cuts and cuts in social benefits and increased the defense budget. The ruling class then commenced a discussion about the advisability of involving Hitler in power. The cabinets of Franz von Papen and Kurt von Schleicher were preparing a coup to dissolve parliament fearing revolutionary uprisings by the working class. The German bourgeoisie then decided that its plans to enforce social attacks could only be achieved by smashing the organizations of the working class. They decided to hand over power to Hitler. In January 1932, Hitler gave his speech to the industry club in Düsseldorf and subsequently received massive funding from German industry. On January 30, 1933, General Paul von Hindenburg appointed Hitler as Chancellor. On March 24, all of the bourgeois parties unanimously voted for the Enabling Act, which gave Hitler dictatorial powers. Fascism in Germany was the result of the crisis of capitalism and the war plans of the ruling class. It demonstrated that capitalism and democracy are ultimately incompatible with one another. The revelations by Edward Snowden have shown how far the trend towards authoritarian power structures has progressed today. Edward Snowden has revealed that the NSA, the British GCHQ, British intelligence, and many more store and browse all digital traffic. They use programs such as XKeyscore to store and examine all emails, phone calls, profiles of movement, internet calls across the planet. Let's suppose somebody visits a specific event, a demonstration, or he looks at a specific website. He can then automatically be drawn into a group of suspects. Employees of the intelligence agencies can then read his mails or telephone calls a week ago. Edward Snowden revealed that the whole world is subject to surveillance of its digital communication. Hans-Jörg Geiger, a specialist who led the BND for a period of time, he summed it up in an interview with the Süddeutsche Zeitung as follows. He said, "We have already left the Orwellian era far behind us. The technical possibilities for spying on and ultimately controlling the individual have assumed forms even Orwell could not have imagined. This practice, Orwellian practice, is not limited to the US or the UK. In fact, all of the intelligence services of the Western states work closely with one another. From another document revealed by Snowden, makes clear that the German intelligence services forwarded 500 million data records to the NSA. The BND, the German intelligence agency, has used XKeyscore since 2007. The Office for the Protection of the Constitution uses the same program and was trained in it by BND agencies. In turn, the German agents have been trained by the NSA. On the basis of the exchange of this data, the US, both Germany and US, will profit from the exchange of this data. This is a quote. Former NSA Director Michael Hayden told the German television, that after September 11, 2001, there had been important meetings between the intelligence services of the two countries. They decided to set up a common data pool. According to Hayden, we were very open to our friends. We were very clear about what we were up to, about the objectives of the NSA surveillance program. There could be no doubt about this. German intelligence services have regularly monitored German citizens and passed the information on to the United States. But what Snowden has revealed so far is only the most blatant expression of a development which has been taking place for years. In the past 20 years, the structures of a police state have been systematically created in Germany and internationally. In 1994, the criminal justice law introduced in that year permitted the BMD to tap all telephone calls within the country. In 1998, the surveillance laws agreed by the CDU, SPD, FDP allowed the monitoring, acoustic monitoring of all rooms and telecommunications. There's been a dramatic increase in the number of cases of this surveillance. This graphic deals with the officially recognized cases of monitoring carried out by the German police. These are official figures and therefore very likely an underestimation of the real extent. In 2001, the powers of the BND were further expanded in the anti-terror package. It extended the BND powers to monitor banking, postal and air traffic data and forward this information to the police. In addition, and this is often forgotten, the bans placed on civil service employees were extended to security relevant parts of the private sector. On the basis of this law, in early 2005, 1,500 employees of the German Labour Agency were controlled because they were alleged to be working in a security environment of significance. Errors in their work could lead to social turmoil, it was argued. The second security package in 2002, the SPD Green government increased the powers of the intelligence agencies, created new powers for the police and intelligence agencies. Now, the intelligence agencies were allowed almost unlimited access to banking, telephone, and data communication of the population. This meant it meant that the separation between the intelligence and police agencies was overcome. This separation was a product of the lessons learned from the Second World War and Hitler's secret police, that there should be a separation between these powers. This has been now overcome. All of the intelligence and police agents have now been highly centralized and brought together. What's been created in recent years on the basis of anti-terror laws comes frighteningly close to a central intelligence and police authority. The first practical implementation of the new legislation was brought in 2004 with the creation of the so-called Joint Counterterrorism Center, GTAZ in German, where all German security authorities were brought together under one roof. In a specially constructed building in Berlin-Treptow, the various constitutional protection agencies, the Foreign Intelligence Agency, the BND, Federal Criminal Police, Federal Police, the Attorney General, and numerous other security services work closely with one another. They have 9 working groups with representatives of all the intelligence forces represented in these working groups. There are no legal restrictions on the exchange of information and data between these different offices. In 2005, there was a decision to move the BND to Berlin. The new building gives an impression of what's being planned. It's 280 meters long, 150 meters wide, 30 meters high. Its construction costs are estimated at 1.5 billion euros. This is not a full view of the building. It's in December 2006, the anti-terrorism database was decided upon. This database is accessed by all of the German intelligence agencies and police agencies. It can store communication data, motion profiles, external characteristics, religion, and much more. There are virtually no restrictions on who and what can be included in the data. It includes records of more than 17,000 people, of whom just 400 are classified as violent Islamists. In 2009, the Federal Criminal Police Office Act was amended and the authority given more far-reaching powers. The police were brought together with the intelligence, however now the police have the powers themselves of the intelligence agencies to monitor and undertake surveillance of communications. The BKA, the federal police, can now operate virtually without any control. In July 2012, the Federal Constitutional Court legitimized the use of the armed forces in Germany. The use of the armed forces in Germany. And specifically with the measures and means which the police are not allowed to use. The reactionary character of the surveillance and repressive machinery became clear with the discovery of the neo-Nazi NSU gang. The facts which had come to light about the activities of this terror gang make clear the implication of the involvement of the intelligence services themselves in their activities. All of the laws on state power were justified by the fight against terrorism. Now it's clear that the 10 most brutal attacks carried out in the past 15 years were carried out under the noses of the intelligence services. The first murder weapon and were available to the of the 129 people in the direct environment of the NSU, at least 24 of these were on the payroll of the state authorities. 3 days after the NSU was discovered, various files relating to the activities of the group were destroyed. This was carried out outside of the official channels. The cooperation between extreme right-wing circles and their brutal activities are fully in line with the history of the German secret services. From 1955, the Office for the Protection of the Constitution was established by Hubert Schrubbers, who had formerly served for the Nazi SA and as a chief prosecutor for the Nazis. He occupied many of the leading posts in the German intelligence agency after the war with former leading Nazis, and the exclusive activity of the intelligence agency was directed against left-wingers. In the 1970s, the German intelligence services organized the screening of 1.4 million candidates for public services. Since the early 1990s, there have been increasing reports about the activities of Secret Service agents in the activities of extreme right-wing organizations. As the MPD, there was a legal case to ban the MPD, the extreme right NPD. It was thrown out because it was revealed that every seventh MPD functionary was on the payroll of the German secret services. The government has reacted to the revelations about the close collaboration between the intelligence agencies and the extreme right by pushing forward with the merging of police and the intelligence agencies. The GTAZ, which I mentioned previously, has now had increased power, and amongst its new powers is the struggle against left-wing extremism. It's become a sort of super constitutional, a super intelligence agency in which all the different spheres of the state can collaborate and work together. This incomplete chronology shows that in Germany in the past 20 years, we've seen the establishment of the structures of a police state. And it's very evident that the comprehensive monitoring and the creation of a right-wing intelligence complex is directed not against terrorism, but the people, the population as a whole. This is also evident when one looks at developments in an international context. In Greece, there have been a whole series of violent social attacks and confrontations in recent years. Under these conditions, the state apparatus has been repeatedly used against the social opposition. You can see this clearly in the picture above. This year, on 3 separate occasions, striking workers have been placed under martial law and forced by the police to return to work. And then in July of this year, in the course of the visit by the German finance minister Wolfgang Schäuble to Athens, the government declared a demonstration on a ban on all demonstrations. In Greece, the police are now openly working together with the fascists of the Golden Dawn. Attacks on immigrants, homosexuals, political opponents are a daily event. And similar measures are being prepared here in Germany. The state apparatus is supported by all parties. It is not simply due to a particularly ruthless interior minister. It expresses a fundamental social tendency. As my synopsis shows, the biggest attacks on democratic right took place under the period of power of the SPD and the Greens. They overcame the historic separation of the intelligence services and the police. They prepared for the deployment of the German army abroad, and massively expanded the powers of the security powers. The Left Party has also made clear that it stands firmly on the side of the state apparatus. When the NSA affair came to public attention and pressure increased on the intelligence agencies, the representative of the Left Party in the Parliamentary Control Commission, Wolfgang Neskowitz, said the following: "I understand the criticism, it's justified, of the intelligence agencies, but we don't abolish the fire brigade because they failed to extinguish a fire." This is the intelligence agencies which permitted at least 10 racist murders. They're described as a fire brigade. Petra Pau, the Left Party representative in the Parliamentary Committee to investigate the NSU, has also played a leading role in the cover-up of its criminal activities. She said, "This committee has succeeded in placing the real content of our work before the squabbling for short-term partisan advantage and advancing one's own profile. If there were conflicts, and of course there were, then they were clarified out of the sight of the public with a great readiness to compromise on all sides." There couldn't be any clearer demonstration of the united front of these political parties against the population. You can continue this list. Stefan Boxhan, the current representative of the Left Party on the Commission, has defended the pledge to secrecy made of all of these on the committee meetings. The information discussed on the control committee has to be kept secret, he said. The Left Party also has a representative in the so-called G10 Commission, Ulrich Maurer. Its task is to examine the monitoring activities of the secret services and approve them. After the revelations of Snowden, Maurer referred to the trusting collaboration carried out with the intelligence services. In all of these bodies, the Left Party has proven to be a reliable partner of the secret services. And as it did when it was in power in the Senate in Berlin, it's always agreed to expansion of surveillance. If leading members of the party now call for abolition of the Secret Service or the BND, it's only to cover their own tracks. There is in fact an alliance stretching from the Conservatives to the Left Party to support the creation of authoritarian forms of rule. A whole layer of petty bourgeois and intellectuals who previously defended democratic rights within certain limits have now developed ideologies full in support of a stronger state. Professor Munkler, Herefried Munkler of the Humboldt University, is considered a leftist historian. In an article, however, he wrote recently, the title of the he wrote an article, Lame Duck Democracy. He wrote, "Democracy is like a fussy old aunt who knows everything but is no longer really in touch. There is, however, a young and powerful nephew who is willing to help but occasionally has dictatorial inclinations. Should we make his services available to the aunt? Or has she served her time and doesn't want to accept it because she's so nice and friendly? In the same article, Munkler then discusses the various options with regard to the weaknesses of democracy and how it could be overcome. In addition to open dictatorship, he says the possibility of an so-called eco-dictatorship based on Plato's concept of a dictatorship of philosophers, with the superior aim of rescuing the environment. Munkler even raises at the end the concept of a provisional dictatorship, which was first developed by the Nazi jurist Carl Schmitt. Such authoritarian ideologies and concepts are increasingly being discussed ever more openly. The German Interior Minister Hans-Peter Friedrich has raised similar arguments and has the support of various representatives from the media. Today, everyone can reckon with the fact that they're being subjected to surveillance. On this basis, they can estimate that they could receive a visit from the police or even disappear into a prison camp. These decisions are made by a small circle of politicians and representatives of the security agencies. This is the infrastructure for a dictatorship. One could mention many other examples. In politics, the media, former liberal circles, who are now beating the drum for a stronger, more powerful state. There is no longer a basis for the defense of democratic rights within the ruling class and the wealthy middle classes. The reason for this is the extreme intensification of class conflicts. As was the case 80 years ago, the ruling class is prepared to go to all extremes to create the conditions for militarism and there's social attacks on the working class. All the issues that led to the fascism and the Second World War are breaking out once again. The bourgeoisie is using the economic crisis to push through a social counter-revolution of historic proportions in Europe. This is a mass demonstration on Syntagma Square. In Greece, the EU's austerity measures have led to a social disaster. Wages have been reduced by up to 60%. The unemployment rate is now nearly 30%. Under young people, up to 65%. 40% of the Greek population have no access to medical care, and the queues at soup kitchens are growing longer every day. Greece is the role model for the entire continent, and after the elections here in Germany, the federal government will seek to enforce similar tax. The hundreds of billions made available to the banks in recent years is to be recouped from the population as a whole. Germany has a liability of debt of up to 400 billion euros in connection with its policies towards Greece. At the same time, the economic crisis has intensified the imperialist appetite of the German bourgeoisie. The abstention by Germany in the Libyan war is now regarded by the ruling circles as a serious mistake. Representatives from all political camps have come to the conclusion that the imperialist interests of Germany can currently best carried out in cooperation with the United States. This is why Germany has participated from the beginning in the preparations for war against Syria. Since the beginning of the conflict, the German army played a key role in supplying arms to the rebels. A significant proportion of these weapons are transported by sea via Tripoli and then across the border. The German Navy has been stationed in the region since 2006 as part of a UNIFIL mission officially to prevent arms smuggling. But in fact, none of the weapons deliveries have been uncovered by this German operation of the numerous armed shipments to the rebels over this region. In June last year, the German parliament extended the mission on the basis of the aggravated situation in Syria. The same ships, the same German frigates, are used to collate intelligence information, which is then transferred to its American partners. The rebels, supplied with weapons, are primarily constituted by extreme Islamist terrorist elements responsible for countless massacres and war crimes. The German government has developed close connections with these Syrian rebel forces. Via the so-called Day After project, it's built up an extensive network to organize economic reconstruction of Syria after the overthrow of Assad, and all in Germany's interest. At the beginning of the year, 400 German soldiers were stationed on the Syrian border, armed with Patriot missiles. These, in the event of a confrontation with Syria, these Patriot missiles would lead to a war situation. Neither German Chancellor Angela Merkel or the leading opposition candidate Piers Steinbrück have ruled out military participation in a war against Syria on the part of Germany. In the event of an attack on NATO member Turkey, Germany would be obliged to intervene on the basis of the NATO partnership. The logic of the Syrian war leads to a confrontation with Iran and could quickly escalate into a third world war. This is what the German government is preparing for with its military and intelligence intervention in Syria. In 2012, a leading German industrial company's Alliance for Securing Raw Materials set forward its proposals to secure its aims, and it expressly called upon the use of military measures and military means. In 2006, the German government issued its white paper on the future of the German army, which it declared had to be able to carry out its operations to ensure free and unfettered world trade as the basis of our prosperity. This is the perspective of the official perspective for the German army. In 1998, the German army commenced systematic rebuilding from a defensive army into an international intervention force. The number of soldiers was reduced, their weaponry modernized, and it was given a centralized command structure. Such imperialist policy is incompatible with basic democratic rights. According to a survey by the Emnit polling agency, 66% of Germans said that they would not vote for a party which favored intervention in Syria. 66%. And this means all of the parties represented in the election. This is why these issues are basically being kept out of the election campaign, and the elections have degenerated into a sort of political vacuum. At the same time, the structures of a police state are being advanced, because after the elections, all parties are determined to carry out this program of social cuts and advanced militarism. As was the case 80 years ago, the needs of the people are incompatible with the profit interests of the ruling class. And this is why the affluent middle classes and their political representatives are moving closer to the state apparatus. Under conditions of class confrontation, all political tendencies are showing their true colors. We are left with a situation where either the working class overthrows the financial elite, expropriates the banks and corporations, and establishes a workers' government, or the bourgeoisie once again plunges the world into barbarism. The only solution is an international movement of the working class to overcome the policy of war and the move towards police states. Such a movement must be directed directly against capitalism. In a speech recently, David North made this point: capitalism and democracy are incompatible. The one can exist only if the other is destroyed. The destruction of democracy by capitalism would signify the establishment of a fascistic police state regime. The defense of democracy is possible only within the context of a struggle against capitalism for the establishment of workers' power and socialism. As was the case 80 years ago, the only social force that can stop fascism and war is the working class. An independent mass movement of workers is much more powerful than any police state. The move towards dictatorship is not an expression of the strength of capitalism, but rather its weakness. It's lost its legitimacy and can only maintain its domination by brute force. But, as was also the case in 1933, the decisive question is the perspective and leadership of the working class. At that time, the leadership of the SPD and the German Communist Party sabotaged the struggle against Hitler because they'd closed their own alliance with the ruling class. Under conditions of a historic struggle, workers were stripped of their own party and left without revolutionary leadership. Our party, the Fourth International, was founded immediately based on this experience. It continues the revolutionary principles and struggle for the independence of the working class from all bourgeois forces. It is only on the basis of this historical heritage that workers can intervene independently in political life and put an end to war and dictatorship. The rulers have built up a huge surveillance and machinery and police force to suppress the population. It's time that workers responded by building their own party. And that's the aim of our election campaign, the Socialist Equality Party and the Fourth International. I wanted to say what are from which countries: Britain, France, Netherlands, Romania, Turkey, Russia, Germany, everywhere, all major states. Greetings to the meetings from Sheffield. Question? The connection between the social attacks in Greece and the tendency towards authoritarian measures, if something more could be said about this. I think in Greece, it's possible to study these issues very clearly and see the developments very clearly. The social attacks in Greece are very far developed. I've said something about the figures, the extent of the attacks on wages, social benefits. So many workers can no longer afford health care. These are attacks of historical dimensions. The country has been largely forced into ruination. one could observe very closely how these measures are bound up with the move towards an authoritarian state. At the end of the social democratic government of Papandreou, there was a situation where the European Union imposed a technocratic government in Greece, Papademos, led by Papademos, in order to continue the social cuts by a regime which had not been voted in by anybody and basically imposed from outside by the EU. At the same time, massive attacks were carried out on basic rights. Workers were put under martial law. These included sailors. On some occasions, they'd had no wage gap for 3 months. They were striking about the lack of wages. They took strike action to retrieve their wages and feed their families. And the government responded by putting them under martial law. Those workers who continued or refused to go back to work were could have been sent to prison for 5 years. This measure was carried out with the full support of the EU and in the middle of Europe. It's also possible to say a lot more about the collaboration between the Greek police and Golden Dawns. It's estimated 60% of policemen voted for Golden Dawn in the last election. They collaborate together in attacks on immigrants. And when Golden Dawn have carried out attacks on homosexuals, the police often just stand on the sidelines and look on. There's a structure being created to terrorize political opponents. I want to make one last point with regard to Greece. It's significant the way in which the pseudo-left tendencies react to these developments. We've written on a whole number of occasions about the politics of Syriza, how they support the EU, they support the monetary debt policy of the EU. They also support the building up of the Greek state. Tsipras, the leader of Syriza, made a personal visit to the police and said there has to be increased police presence in the poor neighborhoods of the cities, and also that the armed strength, the strength of the German army had to be improved, its weaponry improved. This is under a situation where there's increasing tensions with Turkey, conflicts over oil rights in the Mediterranean. Under these conditions, Syriza lines up with the economic interests of the state for a strengthening of the state, and on the side of the Greek bourgeoisie. And at the same time, this is the same Syriza which is regarded as a role model by all sorts of petty bourgeois groups across Europe. Greece is an important case when we discuss about the relationship between economic and social crisis and the move towards dictatorship. On the one side, there's the working class with strikes. On the other side, there's state apparatus with the support of the pseudo-left groups. And this is an experience which has to be digested by the working class throughout Europe. There's a new question. I'd like to call upon our international audience to pose questions or to give comments from their own countries. We have 166 links from all over the world. Does a working class government require a secret service which bases itself on the agents and personnel of the former bourgeois states? This is a question which has to be answered in a concrete historical fashion. With regard to the Russian Revolution, Rabinovich wrote about the role of the way in which foreign powers intervened against Russia. And this required all sorts of measures in order to defend the revolution. But when we speak about a workers' government, the character of such a government the role of a workers' government is to allow the working class to take the state under their own control and organize society in their own interests. And this is why secret diplomacy is incompatible with a worker state. And incompatible with surveillance and measures against the working class. it's the workers' government which has to make the decisions about decisions, and there can be no talk of a secret apparatus directed against the population. This has to be said very clearly. And a situation as we have today, where all of the population is subject to surveillance, and then on the basis of this surveillance, it's also possible to carry out drone murders to suppress workers. This has nothing to do with the role of a worker state. We have greetings. At the moment, no additional questions. We'll use this point to thank everybody who's attended and listened from internationally, and we'll continue with the discussion here in Bochum.